And what's sort of interesting is like the whole time we've sort of heard from them, just wait until the public sees them side by side. They're going to see this contrast of these two men, and they're going to pick the side of right and might of Biden, and it's not what we're seeing. And I've asked campaign officials. I mean, granted, this was in January, but I sort of asked them, what's going to happen if it doesn't, shake out the way that they're hoping, and they sort of said, no, it will. And so I think this sort of ignorance is bliss thing is something that I think is what's causing this sort of panic, quote unquote, within the party.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by White House reporter Naomi Lim. Naomi, we're talking about a topic near and dear to your heart, and that's existential dread. But this
so my
time,
hair is the color the way it is.
Mine as well. Similar issue. So Democrats, though, say they're feeling it about the Biden reelection campaign. What's going on?
Well, I think this is something that we're seeing because polling has not separated between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and that is even after January 6th, even after a conviction, we're sort of seeing these incredibly tight polls, not only nationally, but in these critical battleground states. And what Democrats are sort of hesitant to say is how worried they are about Biden's re-election chances, just because of these questions circulating around Biden's age and mental acuity, and it's obviously something that they're really sensitive about. So when we sort of started poking around, I think it even got back to the campaign, and I got phone calls from them sort of asking, what I was working on and how they could help and how they could steer me in a certain direction. So they're really protective of the president and of this narrative because I think they know that it's an election liability and something that particularly the debate will bring to the forefront.
So, I mean, on the one hand, it's really close, and historically, people have wiped out leads that are much bigger than Trump's. It's still kind of early, haven't had the conventions yet, but you're in a tie at best with a convicted felon. That seems to be the dilemma Democrats face, is which of those things they think really subs up the state of the race.
And what's sort of interesting is like the whole time we've sort of heard from them, just wait until the public sees them side by side. They're going to see this contrast of these two men, and they're going to pick the side of right and might of Biden, and it's not what we're seeing. And I've asked campaign officials. I mean, granted, this was in January, but I sort of asked them, what's going to happen if it doesn't, shake out the way that they're hoping, and they sort of said, no, it will. And so I think this sort of ignorance is bliss thing is something that I think is what's causing this sort of panic, quote unquote, within the party. But what's really interesting is though some Democrats don't want to use the word panic, they're using other words like frustration with the campaign because they're sort of wrapping up the president in bubble wrap and not getting him out there as often as they would like. There are others that are sort of saying this is a sense of urgency and sort of maybe almost comparing it to like this existential dread that they've always had about Trump. And so I think that it's a waiting game because, as you say, there are people that are still tuned out. The problem is that these candidates, there are very few people that don't know how they feel about these candidates. It's about who is going to turn out on election day, and that's something that we'll see. So
one advantage that Biden has had is money. His fundraising has been generally better than the former President Trump's, but after the felony conviction, even that might change.
Right, and so to be fair though, when we were originally comparing these numbers, Trump was in a primary campaign, maybe not a particularly competitive one, but he was in a primary campaign without the assistance of the Republican National Convention. We saw that trend of Biden out fundraising him shift as soon as the primaries kind of wrapped up after Super Tuesday, and this sort of Trump family of the campaign and the RNC came together. But what was so striking with the post-conviction fundraising is that they raised $53 million in 24 hours. To put that into context, that's how much the Biden campaign raised all of April, only in 24 hours. And so we'll see whether that the cash on hand advantage that Biden had will be evaporated. I think there's this sort of idea that, Biden doesn't have the debts that Trump has when it comes to legal fees because we've seen spending from Trump's leadership PAC as well as his super PAC upward of like $100 million since the start of his legal problems. But if it keeps rallying the base around him, and there's sort of grassroots donors that are giving money to him, and this is like the interesting figure, they sort of said that 25% of the donations that they received recently were first-time contributors, which of course they can keep going back and tapping for more money. And so I think we'll see that at the moment, Biden has a 50 million cash on hand advantage. That's with all of the groups that support him, combined. They're kind of hoping that they had this sort of, they had an Obama Clinton fundraiser in New York, I think in March, and they're hoping that they can sort of create that same success with another sort of star-studded fundraiser in Los Angeles with George Clooney and Julia Roberts, but the real celebrities. The real celebrities, but the one in New York only raised $26 million. So we'll see what happens when the financial disclosures come out in July.
So there's another trial going on now. It doesn't directly involve the president, but it certainly affects him, and that's Hunter Biden. How has the president responded to that?
It's an interesting sort of dilemma because family is obviously really important for Joe Biden, but Hunter Biden has obviously become a political liability, at least in terms of how it's given some Republicans a kind of platform to criticize him. It's been really interesting to contrast the way that the Biden family has approached Hunter's trial. It's ongoing in Delaware over gun-related crimes, just that he lied on a form when he bought it because he knew that he was on drugs, as well as sort of having it in his possession for about 10 days. And we sort of saw First Lady Jill Biden being there. We saw, his daughter Naomi Biden being there, in comparison to in New York, where Melania Trump, for example, wasn't by Donald Trump's side. He's recently come out and said that he won't pardon Hunter Biden, which is something that we sort of knew previously, but for him to sort of have to say it out loud is something that's very striking. It also kind of, I guess, cuts away at the Republican argument that there's lawfare going on if the son...
Two-tiered system of justice.
Exactly. So it's like this delicate game that Republicans have to play when it comes to criticizing it, but at the same time, Hunter Biden has given them plenty of fodder over the past couple of years.
Right, he definitely has. Well, I beg your pardon. Thank you, Naomi. You can read Naomi and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.